In the heart of New York City, nestled between glass towers and rushing taxis, stood a grand hotel, marble floors, velvet chairs, and a chandelier that sparkled like a crown in the morning sun. This place hummed with the rhythm of clinking teacups, whispered deals, and soft footsteps on thick carpets. But on this particular morning, something quieter, something delicate was happening. 8-year-old Leila sat alone on the edge of a plush bench near the hotel's grand piano. Her mother Maria worked in the housekeeping department and had asked her to wait quietly while she finished her duties. Leila had been to the hotel before, always staying close to her mother, always quiet. But today, the piano seemed to call her. It stood tall and gleaming under the morning light, the keys perfectly aligned like smiling teeth. Guests passed by without much notice, more concerned with luggage, meetings, and room service. But Leila saw more. To her, the piano wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was magic. The kind that made your heart feel lighter and your mind wander to places you couldn't name. She hesitated, then reached out. Her small fingers hovered, then landed softly on a single key. A delicate note floated into the air. It was soft, pure, and completely unplanned. She pressed another, then a third. A simple, stumbling melody began to form, something she remembered. From a lullaby her mother used to hum when they had no TV, no toys, just each other. A couple sitting nearby paused their conversation. An older man reading the paper looked up. A young girl, no older than Leila, turned her head and smiled. For a moment, in this busy, luxurious world that wasn't built for her, Leila made something beautiful. But the moment didn't last. A sharp voice cracked through the peace. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" It was Mr. Hawthorne, the front desk clerk. Tall, well-groomed, and always a bit too loud. He marched toward her, his face pinched with irritation. This isn't a playground, he barked, his voice echoing against the marble walls. "You're not allowed to touch that piano. Step away now." Leila froze. Her fingers lifted from the keys like they'd been burned. Her back straightened as if she'd been caught doing something awful. Around her, the room went quiet again, but this time not with wonder, with discomfort. The smiles faded. The couple looked down. The man with the paper folded it slowly. The young girl's smile vanished. Lila's cheeks flushed red. She lowered her head, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. She didn't speak. She simply slid off the bench, folded her hands in front of her, and stepped back. Mr. Hawthorne shook his head and turned away, muttering about staff, children, and disruptions. The piano, still warmed from Leila's touch, sat in silence again. From behind a decorative column, someone else had been watching. An elderly woman with silver hair wrapped in an elegant shawl leaned on her cane, eyes narrowed. She had heard the music, the halting, unsure notes that still managed to carry emotion, and she had seen the child's face, that spark of wonder dimmed by harsh words. But she said nothing. Not yet. Leila returned to the staff hallway, where she waited for her mother in silence. She didn't complain, she didn't cry. But inside her, something felt bruised. She didn't have the words to describe it, but it was the feeling of being reminded she didn't belong, not in places with chandeliers or velvet chairs, or pianos with keys as smooth as ice. She'd only wanted to touch beauty, to play something that made her feel like the world was bigger than uniforms and whispered warnings. Instead, she'd been silenced. But stories like these don't always end where they begin, because sometimes someone sees the spark others ignore, and sometimes, even in the quietest corners of the biggest cities, music finds a way to be heard. Later that day, tucked away from the golden halls and polished chandeliers of the hotel, the world grew smaller, quieter. A narrow cleaning closet, barely wide enough for a mop bucket and a few shelves of supplies, became a place of refuge. Dimly lit by a flickering overhead bulb, it smelled of soap, bleach, and old linoleum, but to Leila it felt safer than the grand lobby ever could. She sat on an overturned crate, her shoulders slumped, eyes red and distant. In her hands, she clutched a torn page from a piano magazine she'd once found in the break room, trashing it, the photo of a young girl performing on stage in a glittering dress. Leila had folded and refolded the page so many times the creases had become white lines across the glossy surface. Her mother, Maria, knelt beside her, her housekeeping apron stained from a long day's work. She gently cupped Leila's face, brushing away the remnants of dried tears with the calloused tenderness only a mother can give. "Mia," she whispered, "you weren't wrong, music is in your soul." Leila shook her head. "He yelled at me." Mama, like I did something bad. Maria sighed, resting her forehead against her daughter's for a moment. The world doesn't always know how to listen to something beautiful when it comes in silence or in small hands. But that doesn't mean your music doesn't matter. Leela leaned into her mother, her body slowly relaxing under the weight of love. They stayed like that for a moment, mother and daughter, sharing silence not born of fear, but of understanding. It was a silence that didn't punish. It healed. Unbeknownst to them, they weren't alone. Just outside the half-closed door, standing quietly with her cane, was Mrs. Ellington, a long-time guest of the hotel. Her white hair was pinned neatly, her pearl earrings subtle yet timeless. She had seen many children pass through this building, children of staff who stayed invisible to the world of luxury and excess. But something about this child was different. She had heard the notes earlier in the lobby. Not just the sound of fingers pressing ivory keys, but the soul behind them. They were clumsy, sure, hesitant, but they carried emotion. Emotion you couldn't teach, emotion that told stories without words. And now, hearing the soft voices of Maria and Leela, Mrs. Ellington's heart stirred. She leaned closer, her sharp eyes narrowing with thought, her voice barely a whisper. Who taught her to touch the keys like that? No one answered. No one needed to. She already sensed the truth. Mrs. Ellington lingered for a few more seconds, then turned away, her heels clicking softly against the tile. Her mind was already working, already weaving a plan. She had once been a music teacher, decades ago, before arthritis claimed her fingers. She knew raw talent when she heard it, and more importantly, she knew how easily it could be lost if no one stepped in to protect it. Leela, unaware of the stranger's presence, reached up and placed the worn magazine page into her mother's apron pocket. Someday, I want to play like that. Maria smiled softly and kissed her forehead. You already do. Outside the closet, a spark had been lit in the heart of an old woman, and in the dimness of a cleaning room, love wrapped its arms around a little girl with music in her soul. Music the world had tried to quiet but couldn't quite silence. Not yet. The hotel lobby had transformed, once a place of quiet whispers and steady footsteps. It now pulsed with life and laughter under the warm evening glow of chandeliers. The grand charity gala was in full swing. Elegant guests in gowns and tuxedos moved through the space with champagne flutes in hand. The sound of a string quartet softly setting the tone for an evening meant to impress. Waiters passed by with silver trays, the scent of roasted lamb and truffle mingling in the air. At the center of it all stood the grand piano, polished to perfection, untouched since that morning when a young girl's timid melody had dared to echo from its keys. Lila stood backstage, though backstage was really just a space behind the heavy velvet curtain that now shielded her from view. She clutched the sides of the pale blue dress Mrs. Ellington had given her. It wasn't expensive, but it was new, and more importantly, it made her feel seen. Her shoes were just a little too big, borrowed from a neighbor's daughter. She didn't care. Her heart thudded in her chest like a drum. Every breath felt like a climb. She wasn't sure how it had happened. One moment, she and her mother were folding towels after the afternoon shift, and the next, Mrs. Ellington was asking her if she'd play for some friends. Her mother had looked shocked, then hesitant, but the older woman's calm smile held assurance. She has something they need to hear, she'd said. All you have to do, my dear, is let her be heard. Now, as the hotel's manager took the microphone, the music stopped, conversation hushed. Ladies and gentlemen, he said with a smile, we have a special performance tonight. A young guest will be sharing something beautiful with us all. Please welcome Leela. A single spotlight lit the stage. At first there was confusion. A few turned their heads. Did he say Leela? Someone whispered. Then, as the curtain drew back, revealing the small girl in the pale blue dress, an audible gasp rose from the crowd. Lila blinked into the light. Her hands trembled at her sides. She could see faces curious, doubtful, some even annoyed. In the back, Mr. Hawthorne straightened, his mouth already opening in protest. What is this? He began. But before he could finish, the hotel manager gave him a firm look and raised a hand. Silence. Leela stepped forward. The ballroom had grown impossibly quiet. The only sound now was her slow footsteps as she approached the piano. Her fingers twitched. She could feel the pressure, the weight of expectations she had never asked for. But then she saw her mother, in a corner, eyes shining with tears, nodding slowly, and near her stood Mrs. Ellington, calm and steady, like a lighthouse in a storm. Leela took a deep breath, climbed onto the bench, and let her hands rest gently on the keys. Asterisk, she didn't have sheet music, she didn't need any, she closed her eyes and played. The first notes were soft, delicate, like a whisper, then stronger, fuller, swelling into a melody she had built in her mind, shaped by lullabies, street sounds, and dreams too big for the places she had lived. It wasn't perfect. A few keys stumbled, but it didn't matter. The music had something more powerful than precision. It had heart, and slowly, expressions in the audience changed. Phones were lowered, conversations stopped, eyes widened, mouths parted in awe. The melody wove through the room like a story of a little girl with no stage, no teacher, just the courage to play from her soul. Asterisk, by the time the last note faded into silence, there wasn't a sound in the room. Asterisk, then came the applause, low at first, uncertain, then rising like thunder. Asterisk, Lila sat still, chest rising and falling, her eyes wide. She had done it, and for the first time, the grand piano didn't feel like it belonged to someone else. Asterisk, it felt like home. Asterisk, the chandelier above shimmered like frozen stars, casting soft golden light across the grand lobby. The air, once filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses, now held something much more delicate, anticipation. Asterisk, Leela sat at the grand piano, her small frame barely rising above the polished wood. The hush was almost eerie. Hundreds of eyes watched, but she didn't let them reach her. Instead, she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let her fingers fall into motion. Asterisk, the first notes whispered from the piano like a secret. A gentle, aching melody curled into the air, simple but soulful, like a memory from childhood, like a voice trying to be heard after too long in silence. And slowly, the room responded. Asterisk, conversations faded, laughter stopped. Guests who had been half-turned toward the bar or caught in conversation with donors now shifted fully toward the sound. Phones that had been raised to record lowered slowly, forgotten. No one wanted to watch this moment through a screen, they wanted to feel it. Asterisk, Lila's hands danced with growing confidence, her fingers telling a story no one had expected, a story of quiet strength, of hidden talent blooming in the shadows. There were no lyrics, but everyone in the room felt something, memories of childhood, of lost dreams, of a time when the world felt simpler, and music could speak what words couldn't. The haunting beauty of the melody held them all. Mrs. Ellington watched from a chair near the front, her eyes glassy, one hand resting lightly on her cane. She had heard great music in her life from grand stages and celebrated names, but this was something else. This was raw, this was real, this was the soul of a little girl who had once been told not to touch. Asterisk, at the back of the room, Mr. Hawthorne stood stiffly by the reception desk. His arms were crossed, his jaw tight, but the longer Leela played, the more his expression softened. His brow furrowed, confused at the emotion he couldn't push down. Then his shoulders dropped, and he let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Asterisk, even he, so proud, so sure of where people did and didn't belong, felt something in that music, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was regret, maybe it was recognition, but for the first time that day, he didn't see a maid's daughter, he saw a musician, one by one. Eyes in the crowd welled with tears. Strangers reached for handkerchiefs, clutched at their chests, held each other's hands. In that moment, it didn't matter what dresses they wore, what jobs they held, or how much their rooms had cost. The music had leveled them, united them. Asterisk and Lila. She kept playing. Asterisk, not for applause, not for praise. She played because this right now was her truth. Her way of speaking when the world had tried to keep her silent. Her way of proving that beauty could come from any place, any heart. Asterisk. When the final note drifted into the stillness, the silence that followed was even louder than the music had been. A pause so complete, it was sacred. Then, like a wave crashing over the room, applause erupted, louder, deeper, more genuine than any the lobby had heard in years. Asterisk, Leela lifted her head slowly, blinking in disbelief at the standing ovation before her. Asterisk, and for the first time, the grand piano didn't feel like a stranger. It felt like it had been waiting for her all along. Asterisk, as the final notes of Leela's performance melted into silence, the grand lobby erupted with applause, thunderous, heartfelt, unstoppable. People rose to their feet, clapping not out of politeness, but from something deeper. Something stirred awake in their hearts. The chandelier above flickered in celebration, casting soft rainbows across tear-filled eyes and astonished faces. Asterisk, Lila sat frozen for a moment, unsure if this was real. Then she looked toward the crowd and saw her mother, Maria, standing at the edge of the room, hands over her mouth, eyes glistening. The moment their eyes met, Lila stood and rushed into her mother's arms, holding on like she never wanted to let go. They stood like that, mother and daughter, wrapped in each other as the room continued to clap, many wiping their eyes, some whispering to one another in disbelief. The quiet girl who had once been scolded for touching the piano now stood at its side, the sound of her music still echoing in every heart present. Then, from the front of the room, Mrs. Ellington stepped forward. Her elegant cane clicked softly on the floor as she approached, her face glowing with calm determination. The applause slowed as people noticed her respected beloved, and now, deeply moved, she turned to face the crowd, then gestured toward Leela. That child, she said, clearly has a gift, a rare one, the kind that deserves to be nurtured, not silenced. A hush fell again. She turned back to Lila and Maria. I would be honored, she continued, her voice warm, to sponsor her musical education. Every lesson, every opportunity she needs, I'll make sure her talent never goes unheard again. For a second, neither Leela nor Maria could move. Maria covered her mouth again, tears pouring freely now. Lila, confused, looked up at her mother for permission. When Maria nodded, Lila rushed forward and hugged Mrs. Ellington tightly around the waist. The older woman chuckled softly, her own eyes misty. The lobby exploded into applause once more, this time even louder. A few guests shouted, "Bravo," and others simply clapped with open-mouthed wonder, as if they'd witnessed a miracle. And then quietly, almost unnoticed at first, Mr. Hawthorne approached. His usual stiffness was gone, no clipboard in hand, no furrowed brow, just a man humbled, changed. He stopped a few steps away and cleared his throat, clearly unsure how to begin. Miss Maria, Leela, he said, voice softer than it had ever been. I owe you both an apology. Maria turned, surprised. Lila looked up at him cautiously. He took a deep breath. I judged before I listened, before I understood. That was a mistake. He turned slightly toward Leela, his voice cracking as he finished. Thank you for reminding us what real beauty sounds like. Leela blinked up at him, and in a small voice said, You're welcome. And in that moment, the cold front desk clerk wasn't so cold anymore. As the crowd slowly dispersed, many walked up to shake Maria's hand, pat Leela's shoulder, or simply smile with admiration. The girl who had once been invisible had not only been seen, she had been heard, and the echo of her music would remain in that hotel far beyond the night's end. Something had changed. Not just for Leela, for everyone.